Hey guys, again, thanks for following me on Instagram and YouTube. As promised, here's a little video breaking down this scene and show how it was made. I uploaded this image quite some time ago on Facebook, and people seem to love the lighting and they want to know how it was made and what was the secret. So I will show you the lighting setup, I'll show you the scene and how it was set up. It's really not fancy at all. So let's take a look. So I think the first thing that grabbed the attention of everybody was these fabrics. A lot of fabrics placed around the sofa, the ottoman. I think everybody's curious to know how it was made, but the process was pretty simple actually. I just used the cloth simulation from Blender. I didn't use any other kind of software to generate these cloths. So I will show you a little bit how I did that and explain some tricks, and yeah, so let's go. Okay, before we jump on the cloth simulation, I want to show you the architecture of this scene. It's pretty simple. Actually, it was just a box and I extrude some parts of it. The windows, I just like place a box and apply a boolean like to create these holes in the architecture. But as I said, it was pretty simple. It was very like fast to create it. Okay, so to talk about the cloth simulation, I want to show you some of the process I start doing, and then we can move forward to show you a little bit of the sculpting. Okay, the first thing you're going to do is to create a plane. Then I will go to the edit properties and I will subdivide it a little bit, several times actually. Then I will apply a modifier called subdivision surface, and then I will go and increase the level viewport. I will deactivate optimal display as well. Okay, so next thing you're going to do is apply the cloth. And first of all, I start playing with the standard numbers before I move forward and try new things. Okay, this is important for everything I do. And then I see if there is something like missing or I have to do something. For example, I doing this, I know that I have to apply the collision on the rest of the objects. So this is to be the next part. Sometimes I try to apply more subdivisions to see if it increase the realism, things like that. So let's apply the collision for all of these objects, and then let's play with the simulation again. So now you can see that the plane is covering the entire sofa and there is no object missing in this part. So this is the step I did in this entire cloth simulation sofa. So I started playing with a lot of kind of planes and position it um, in different positions actually, and this started bringing some realism feeling for this scene. So as I said, every cloth here was made using this technique. It it was really fun to do that actually. It didn't like take too much time, and I learned a lot of things that increased the realism. And one thing that helped me to increase the realism was the sculpting. So before we jump to the sculpting, always apply to your cloths some thickness. It will help you with the realism as well. Okay. And yeah, a subdivision, yeah, it always helps. So okay, here's where the trick comes in. After doing the simulation, I start sculpting in in the plane, in the object. So it helps on the final touch, final details, and try to bring some wrinkles on the cloth. So it will bring this realism to the scene. So it's very important to do that. Otherwise, it will be just a flat plane, a flat blanket, and for sometimes, for depend on the blanket, depend on the material, uh, it needs to be flat. But we know that sometimes we want to create wrinkles, so be subtle when you create it, and always take a look on your reference. Okay, so it's very important. Okay, so for the next step, let's take a look at my shader editor. Uh, so as you can see, the materials, they are pretty simple. I'm not using too many maps. Actually, in this shader, I'm using just one map and one displacement linked to this map. And where did I take it from? So this is the website. Probably most of you guys already know this one. Uh, and this website actually has pretty good texture maps and with really good resolutions as well. So I don't remember. I think I download most of these textures. I have uh, I have it in my library. But as you can see, for example, this one, you have a lot of different kind of resolutions. So I think the maximum one for this one is 5K, but it's more than enough. 5K is more than enough to have a really good result on the displacement. Okay. Um, okay, so let's take a look at another one. Okay, this one, maybe, yeah, maybe this one. This one, I didn't even use any displacement. I just plugged it in there. The resolution of this texture was so good that didn't need any more than that. And for this accessory on the table, I use some weaker maps from Polygon, I think. Okay, so let me take a look at another one. Okay, and this one, I'm using two different maps. So one for displacement that helped me with this kind of shader, this kind of fabric. And for the diffuse, I'm using another map. So this map in the displacement slot was took from the textures.com, and the other one I think I took it from Google. Okay, so how about what was modeled in this scene? So most of the scene was modeled by me, except for this guy on the table and this cactus on the side, on the right side of the sofa. Okay, so the rest of the entire scene was completely modeled by me. Okay, so probably I I could I could model it, but for some reason I think I was already done by modeling. This is not my expertise, so I think I did a lot in this scene. So even like the plant on the left side of the sofa, I modeled it as well. Okay, so how about the cameras? In most of my scenes, I try to use a 90 degrees angle. So in the X over here, rotation, I always use a very straight camera angle. It's very rare when I use some angles downwards or upwards. So I try to be very straight in every frame, in every composition I do. So this is important for architecture visualization. So if you are in this field, it's important to try to replicate this kind of angles, this kind of straight angles, right? So there are reasons when I'm working with product, because my company Illustravis work with a lot of products, that I need to do different angles downwards and upwards. But it mostly I do it when I work with products. Okay, so how about the lighting? A lot of people ask me about what was my lighting setup, and actually, this is the lighting setup. It was like actually pretty simple. As I said at the beginning of this video, there isn't anything fancy at all about this scene. So Octane has this amazing GI, and the lighting bounce are pretty good actually. So I didn't need to do anything else. Most of my scenes actually, they look really realistic, because sometimes less is more. So I try to be very subtle on any lighting or anything I do in my scenes. Okay, as you can see here, I have this sun lighting coming through the window, and this is something that most the most of the cases and in most of my scenes I try to do, even if it's just a little spot like bouncing the sunlight, because it helps to bounce the rest of the lighting in my scene and bring the warm feeling. And for some reason I really like it, and that's why I always try to keep some light entering in my scene. Okay, so yeah, the lighting, as I said, was like that. I didn't use any HDR, and yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the render settings. Here in the Octane kernel, I'm using the path trace as kernel type. And for quality, I'm using the max samples 1000 and max preview samples 800. 1000, it's a really good number for the scene, and I didn't have any problem with noise, so it was pretty smooth. Um, okay, so max diffuse depth, max gloss depth, and max scatter depth. I'm using the default standard from Octane, so I didn't need to increase this number. So also the GI clamp I'm using 5 for the scene is more than enough. And for adaptive sampling, I'm using 0.03. Okay, so it's important you always keep adaptive sampling on. Okay, so it does a huge impact in your scene. Okay, so let's jump on the camera and let's see what I have here. So I'm using a focal length 37 millimeters. Okay, camera, I'm using the rule of thirds, so we have to activate it. Where is that? I think it's in viewport display. Port display. Oh, down here. Composition guides. So just turn thirds on. So, or other kind of composition guides. It's important to do that. So I always have it turned on. Okay, so the focus, I didn't use any any focus on the scene in depth of field. So it was left in autofocus, okay? But most of the time I try to use a little bit of depth of field. So always subtle, as I always say, and don't overdo your settings, okay? It's important to keep it in mind. Okay, so let's jump on the Octane Camera Imager. So here I'm using sRGB, and to use sRGB in the Octane camera image, you need to change color management to sRGB as well, okay? So this is the workflow I'm working on most of my images, okay? So that's why my gamma is in 1, and that's why my image looks a little bit lighter than probably you have doing in your image. Okay, saturation I sometimes like decrease it to 0.9. I didn't have any problem with the hot pixels, so I didn't remove any hot pixel in this scene. Okay, so let me see. Um, the other thing I usually use in my scenes most of the time is LUT. So I have like these two guys over here, low contrast and high contrast. So sometimes I create new ones, and it's important to use it, I think, because it helps you to understand your final image. So sometimes I create LUT in Photoshop and just use it to understand how it will be at the end of the render. So it's important to use it, I think. Okay. And the next step and the last thing I think we're going to talk about is the post-production or post-processing, as called in Octane. So I'm using a bloom and a glare power to help enhance the bloom on the bulbs on that area. Okay, so as you can see, it helps to bring the realism of the lighting in those bulbs. So it's really important if you have this kind of lighting bulbs appearing in your scene. It's important to increase this bloom and glare because it is how it works in real life. So again, be subtle, don't overdo things. Otherwise, you already know. I talked a lot about that, so that's enough. Okay, so I think we have one last thing to discuss is about my hardware. So what have I been using? So let's check it out. What is it? Yeah, device preference. So I'm using a GeForce RTX 2070. So it's the only thing I'm using, and I turn it on RTX acceleration. So yeah, it's basically that. I'm using anything more than that. Okay, so RTX, it's helping a lot in speeding up the process to see the preview of your renders. And I know that it's not very cheap to buy one RTX, but I really recommend, if you can buy one, it will help you a lot. Okay, guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope this open scene helped you to understand a little bit more about my process. Okay, thank you very much and see you in the next video.